Welcome to Horror in Detail. Are you ready to embark on a chilling journey into the realms of darkness? The mysterious and the bone-chilling world of horror stories. On this channel, we are dedicated to unraveling the most terrifying tales that will send shivers down your spine. First story: a blind Wendigo. Imagery for the story: truck driver with a mid-sized company, my assigned truck being a long-nosed Peterbilt with one of those driver-controlled searchlights mounted just above the mirror. I've been driving for 5 years, have gone 650,000 miles and somehow managed not to lose my mind in the process. Come one autumn day about a year back, and I was given the delivery that would bring me an experience I hadn't thought would exist except in my worst nightmares. I had received a message on my truck's computer to make a multi-stop run from Indianapolis to Duluth, then from Duluth to a town called Ely. The run to Duluth had been no problem with a 2-day trip. The run from Duluth to Ely seemed a bit trickier, what with the quickest, legal, run being Minnesota Route 1 from Minnesota 61. It was that certain kind of night where everything was shrouded in darkness. The moon was covered by the clouds and a winter storm was on the horizon, making the air even colder than it already was. I figured that I deserved a nice warm cup of coffee after this drive was over. The drive along 61 was uneventful with only a couple of cars and semi-tractors on the road this late into the night. The radio was calling for a light forecast of hazy rain with a relatively thick fog until that afternoon. All the more reason to get this run finished, I supposed. Sometime along Route 1, my trailer began shaking violently with my truck having difficulty in pulling it. Pulling along a flat line of grass, I noticed one of my tires on my trailer had ruptured. Annoyed with losing time, I pulled into a small grove and parked along a worn dirt path facing the highway. To rear of my tractor was a thick bundle of northern forest that likely hadn't seen human tracks in decades. A quiet wind washed over me as I relayed a breakdown message to my company, receiving another that a tow wouldn't be out until the morning. No problem. I've got a fridge full of food and a satellite for TV. Several hours passed as I laid in my bed. A windstorm woke me up as I tossed and turned to gain my bearings. That wasn't wind I was hearing. The best I can describe it is the sound of metal sliding against metal, like the brakes of a locomotive. The noise was some distance away, roughly a quarter mile to the rear if I had to guess. The noise was getting closer, more to the left of my truck, somewhat about the front of the trailer. I could hear what sounded like tapping fingers or claws against my trailer. The sound of hoofsteps marching through the thick grass alerted me to the fact that this may be just a harmless animal, wishing to take a look and ease my nerves. I slid the curtains open and came face to back with the stuff of nightmares. The antlers reached to the top of my truck's windows. The creature brandishing them was a hunched-over, bipedal mass of skin and bones with the skull of some deer or elk. Fearfully, I turned the searchlights on to get a better look at the thing in question and to hopefully frighten it off. I wish I hadn't. The light itself hadn't alerted the creature, but me moving myself in the truck had set it into a hunched-over stance, keeping an ear open for some form of prey, I presumed. I noticed empty eye sockets that seemed to go on forever that slotted into the ancient skull of some sort of deer or elk. I was afraid of turning the key in fear of rousing this monster's predatory hunger. It looked near starvation, as though it had been years since it last ate. I sat and waited. It was near 5 o'clock. The tow wouldn't come to work until around 7. A buck, roughly a 10-pointer, meandered into the field before spotting the creature in question. This thing has to have some great hearing since it didn't see the deer wander across its sight lines. It was blind, had to have been. Moments passed before the buck began chomping on berries from a nearby bush. The blind monster heard the sounds and pounced. From 15 feet it took all but 5 seconds for the buck to have been gutted and torn apart. The creature didn't seem to want the buck for food, more or less rather for twisted enjoyment. I had seen enough. Turning the engine over, the monster looked in my general direction and roared threateningly as it rushed to make contact with my truck. I managed to pull forward just enough that it made contact with the trailer instead. The trailer lifted up a few inches as the sound of bending metal embedded itself into my ears. Shifting from third to fifth and continuing to 10, the creature was still in chase until I crossed over a hill. Looking back through my mirrors, the monster was gone. I pulled off and got out. The sounds of scraping metal were far and away, replaced by the quiet rustling of trees. I continued driving again until I came upon an area that trucks could park in, well-lit and asphalt, much better and safer than the grove from earlier. Afternoon came, and I went to inspect the damage from last night's incident done to my trailer. Claw marks etched into the driver's side of the trailer went on for the whole length of 53 feet. A massive dent roughly 2 feet from the truck itself reminded me that I wasn't just fortunate to be alive, I was damn lucky. The delivery went off without complication since the tow only had to change a tire, and I went home several days later, the creature still on my mind. I went online to figure out, bluntly, whatever the hell it was. The skull of a deer and possible bloodlust for people brought me to several conclusions, the most effective that I was either losing my mind in the mountains or that I had come face to face with an American Indian folklore nightmare known as the Wendigo. Essentially what becomes of you if you cannibalize on human flesh. I've no plans on stopping on Route 1 overnight again. Talks with the locals included everything from ghosts to, of course, that same Wendigo I had encountered. I went on Route 1 again last week. The sounds of scraping metal were heard once more, and I saw a shadow move across the forest at a blistering speed. I noticed that it didn't get too close this time, just close enough to see the fog from its breathe. It knows who I am. It's just waiting for me to let down my guard. Second story. This story was shared by you/SJ20442. Something attacked us when we went hiking in the woods, and I'm probably going to go missing for knowing about it. If you're reading this, I'm probably missing or dead. You can't briefly describe the indescribable, so I've resolved to recount everything that happened to the three of us, exactly how it happened, to ensure that the truth remains out there one way or another, regardless of what happens to me. My name's Cole Gray. In October of 2018, my friends and I organized a hiking trip into the woods nearby for a few days over the school holidays, where we encountered something that is now permanently burnt into my mind. My account begins early April, the middle of week 11. We were 16 at the time, and God, we hated school. Our peers were callous, imbecilic assholes. The teachers were overworked, and as a result they were quick to anger and overly strict. The facilities couldn't have been updated in at least a decade. We were in English when I got a text from Alec. Reading. It's on. We knew what he was on about. Alec came late that day, opened the door, trudged over to where we were sitting and flopped onto the chair like a corpse, the teacher giving him a death glare all the while. She yelled at him something about disrespect. I wasn't really listening. I was more interested in what Alec had to say. Alec looked over at us with a grin on his face. They said we can do it. Alec's father was an outdoor enthusiast, an interest which Alec had inherited. He'd had the idea of us spending a few days by ourselves in the forest near Alec's house. It was a decent size, something like 200 square kilometers. There was even a lake that we planned to go fishing in. I'm not sure how Alec talked us into it. He was charismatic, I guess. A normal parent wouldn't have allowed that. But we lived in a small town and ours worked a lot, hence our independence was encouraged from an early age. Not to mention the fact that Alec was perfectly competent in everything we'd require. We all organized hiking bags. I packed a sleeping bag, a tent, lots of water, canned food, a portable stove, survival knife, compass, fishing rod, lighter, you get the picture. Our plan was to set off into the woods on the Friday and make our way about 15 kilometers in, although Alec's father did say not to go past the lake. I guess I need to explain why. On the outskirts of town there was some sort of facility. There was only one dirt road going to and from it, cutting through the woods. It could be found about a kilometer north of the lake. Those who had braved the hike through the forest reported that it was sealed off from the outside world via an absurdly heavy-duty concrete wall surrounding the entire compound. It had to have been at least 4 or 5 meters tall, they would say. It was besmirched with graffiti from those with the adrenaline-fueled impulsiveness required to go looking for it. The top of the wall was heavily bestrewed with angled spikes and an overhanging tangle of razor-sharp barbed wire to ensure with absolute certainty that no prying eyes would peer upon the compound's contents. All of this earned the building the townspeople's nickname for it, Alcatraz. Alcatraz's wall was absurdly overkill for the purpose of keeping people out. What the fuck could they have possibly been keeping in there that warranted such a ludicrous aggregate of defense? It didn't occur to me at the time that it wasn't designed to keep us out. It was designed to keep something else out. It was a common occurrence to see trucks and black SUVs coming and going, definitely military and government. The SUVs were occupied by shady-looking men in black suits, the trucks with soldiers. The building was the obsession of those in the town interested in conspiracy theories. Their theories ranged from a containment facility for alien life to a research facility specializing in human mind control experiments. You understand what I'm getting at. Hearing all the theories fascinated me since I was young, but I never really believed in any of it. God, was I wrong. The sheriff did attempt to learn what was inside at the behest of some of the more neurotic townspeople, only to be forced to turn back at gunpoint. The town nutters had a fucking field day with that. Since no one was allowed inside, there was no way to know for sure what the compound was being used for. The frighteningly plausible theories and general mystery surrounding the place like a fine mist proved to be enough motivation for people to stay clear of the place. For the most part, there were those few people reckless enough to go looking, 1 or 2 of whom didn't come back. People didn't like to talk about that. Everything went smoothly for the first part of the afternoon. We had noticed some trucks speeding along the main road in the direction of Alcatraz. It was common to see that, but there were more than usual. That's weird, I remember thinking to myself. Alec elbowed me in the shoulder and chuckled. Maybe some of those aliens escaped from Alcatraz? Hey, Cole? Aha. Very funny, you dickhead. We settled on ditching school early, leaving at 3 and walking until it got dark, before setting up the tents. The forest was far more beautiful than I had imagined in the weeks leading up to our expedition. The forest floor and the trees were dense with the oranges, yellows, and browns of the autumn leaves. The trees stretched up so tall into the sky that the tops had reduced to being barely visible from our perspective. It was cloudy, the golden sunlight of the dim autumn afternoon bleeding through the cracks in the canopy high above our heads. The forest was alive with the calming sounds of birds chirping quietly around us, the chilly October wind sifting through the trees. All I can say is that it was truly an experience to behold. We found a good little clearing at about 7 that night. For hours of walking had taken its toll on my feet, for sure. Alas, the work for the night wasn't yet complete. While Alex set up the tents, he had Dom and I take the saw and go scrounging for firewood. I had collected a decently sized bundle when my nose was accosted by the foulest thing I had ever smelt. The odor was unfamiliar, but I recognized it regardless as the reminiscent stench of death. I looked to my left and dropped the kindling I had spent the last quarter hour collecting in sheer disgust and shock at the horrific scene before me. A deer, I think. It was hard to tell. The poor thing had been absolutely mauled, eviscerated beyond recognition. Its head was almost torn clean off, attached only by the sinews of the back of its neck. The rib cage had been torn apart, the entrails scattered all over the ground before it, some of it even splattered on the adjacent trees. I called Dom and Alec over, and upon seeing it they both reared up and groaned in disgust. If anyone knew what was responsible for this act of animalistic savagery, it was Alec. I shot him a look. His face was painted with fear and confusion, not something I had seen before. Alec, any idea what could have done this? No bloody clue. This isn't like anything I've ever seen before. By the way he spoke to me, I could tell he was truthful and that he had no idea. B-Bear could have done this, but predators kill for food and this thing hasn't been eaten. Dom chimed in. This is so messed up. I didn't get much sleep that night. I don't think the others did either. The morning was spent exploring, but everything looked the same, so we tried not to stray too far from camp. The lake had a jetty, so we went down and did some fishing. We didn't catch much. The day descended into night. It would have been a little bit past midnight. We were talking around the raging campfire when we heard it. Gunshots. Rapid, probably from a rifle of some kind. 2 separate sets of shots. And then there was the screech. That fucking screech. Shrill, piercing. No way it was natural at all. It couldn't have come from more than a few hundred meters into the forest. Dom interrupted the pursuant silence. Jesus Christ. What was that? I don't think we want to know. Most would have turned tails and bolted in the opposite direction, but we had alcohol-fueled courage on our side and hence we decided to check it out. If only we had known just how bad the consequences of our stupid decision would be. We got our torches from our bags and trudged off into the darkness. After several minutes of looking, we came to where we thought the unholy screeching had come from. I strained my ears to listen. Nothing. Drip. I felt something warm on my shoulder. Drip. I used my fingers to wipe it off and placed them under the light of my torch. Blood. Still warm. I pointed my torch upwards and recoiled in horror, too shocked to scream. So did the others. It was a body. Human. Dressed in what looked like military clothing. It was impaled on a broken branch only meters above the ground, both of its arms gone. His throat had been torn out. There were deep lacerations all over his torso. Alex stared in shock, unable to rip his eyes away from the horror before us. Dom put his hands over his mouth and started quietly sobbing to himself. I rolled over and vomited all over the ground. As horrific as the mangled corpse was, I heard sinister growling noise about 50 meters ahead and looked up from the contents of my stomach to see something much, much worse. Hunched over, eating what could only have been another corpse, was something that will infest my nightmares until the day I die. It was skeletal, as gangly as a rake, twitching erratically. It had antlers on the top of its head that had no earthly right to be there, with skin was as pale as the full moon. It was on all fours with its arms and legs bent at horrifyingly unnatural angles. The others noticed it as well. I knew because Dom's quiet sobbing was quickly replaced by deathly silence. I spoke shakily. What in God's name is TH? It realized we were there and bellowed out the same infernally shrill screech that we had heard before. I yelled out in apprehensive realization of what I had just brought upon myself. The thing closed the distance between us and it in seconds with sporadic, terrifyingly fast bursts, alternating between the ground and the trees. I stumbled back, tripped over a root, and within a blink of an eye the ungodly creature was on top of me, pinning me down by my arms. I screamed in pain at its knife-like claws digging into my forearms. It was humanoid, however anything but. Its piercing eyes were all-consumingly black, and its mouth was lined with crooked, freakishly long and horrifyingly sharp teeth. It opened its hideous mouth impossibly wide and shrieked deafeningly loud into my face. I swear I saw my life flash before my eyes as it was about to tear into me when it shrieked in pain. Alec had stabbed it in the back with his knife before it turned from me, grabbed him, and sunk its teeth into his neck as he let out a blood-curdling scream that I can still feel resonating throughout my skull. No. I stumbled over to it, grabbed hold of the knife's hilt, and with all the panicked force I could gather I wrenched it from the thing's back and stabbed it again as deep as I could, choking up the forest with its angry shrieks. It let go of Alec and stumbled to the side, but I was too late. My friend was dead. Dom and I looked at each other. I took one last look at my friend before we started in the opposite direction. I looked back and saw it pulling the knife out of its back, black with blood. I looked over at Dom. Hide. Hiding would typically be a bad decision, but there was no way in hell we could have outrun that thing. We both hid behind respective trees. I waited a few seconds and slowly looked back toward it on the left side of the tree. Nothing. I looked to the right and was forced to freeze before I had the chance to reinsert myself behind cover. It stood upright at well over 2 meters tall, and within a meter of my face. It had to have seen me. It was blind? It shrieked, listening intently, and it took all my willpower to stop myself from panicking. The night when the only thing to mask the sound of my shallow breathing. Dom and I locked eyes and I mouthed a warning. It's blind, don't move. He nodded shakily in recognition. I don't know if what happened next was a sympathetic act of an otherwise cruel god or just a life-saving coincidence, but it started storming. Hard. The sound seemed to confuse and enrage it because it started to shriek and swing its claws around aimlessly. We took the chance and backed away, which turned into full-on running. This time, I didn't look back as the hellish shrills faded into the distance. We ran until I tripped over. I must have hit my head on a rock or something like it because I remember the feeling of blood trickling down my face while everything around me faded into the blackness. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed. Dom had dragged me back to our camp and hidden me as best he could while he went to get help. We were both questioned by a couple of men in suits, except they weren't from the sheriff's department. They were the same men that we had seen in those black SUVs. They said only that they were from nearby. I couldn't help but wonder if they somehow had something to do with the thing in the forest. They claimed to have done a preliminary investigation, but I was shocked and angered to hear that they had declared it a bear attack. It was at this point that we both knew something was amiss. We tried looking into it, but the suits informed us that it was a closed case, implying that it wouldn't end well for us if we didn't leave it. I heeded the warning, but Dom didn't. No one's heard from him in days. I'm writing this so that people will know the truth if I go missing. I don't care how many therapists they make me see, how many drugs they make me take. They can threaten me all they want, but I know the truth of what happened in the forest. Third story. This story was shared by you/Not the Ghost. Wendigo. I love the woods. I love mountains. Being able to live so close to nature is a privilege I've never taken for granted. But recently, something strange happened out there that I'd like to share. I was heading down a path in the woods, not far from my home. It had been snowing heavily for the past couple weeks and was finally starting to calm down. In the distance, I noticed what appeared to be a man, leaning against a log, far from the trail. He was still. I feared maybe he had been stuck out here and frozen in that spot. It's all too common out here when the snowfall is heavy. I made my way over to him. As I got close, I could see his ears and fingers were frostbitten. His clothes were dirty and disheveled. His mouth was covered in dried blood. When I was only a few steps from him, his head began to move, slowly turning and looking at me with dead, glazed-over eyes. His expression was vacant until he looked at me with surprise and a crazed sort of fear. He tried to stumble to his feet, but instead ended up flailing into the deep snow. I talked softly and slowly. "Do you need help? How long have you been out here?" The man wouldn't, or perhaps couldn't, speak. However, nearby was a small hiking backpack with a tag on it that listed an address. I knew where the address was, just a few miles from my home. He must be a neighbor. I tried asking him if that was where he lived. He just kept looking at me with that crazed, fear-drenched stare, but eventually he was able to nod in affirmation. I had no way of contacting anyone, so I figured my best option would be to take him myself. Who knew how much longer he'd last out there if I left to get help? I picked him up to stand on his feet, and he was remarkably light. He leaned on my shoulder at first, but after walking for a short time, he walked almost entirely on his own. He began to say things, as if he was talking to himself, a low, dry, gurgling sort of speech. It felt very inhuman. He must be delusional, I thought. I tried to get him to talk to me. "How long have you been out here?" "Weeks." His voice was like gravel. "I'm taking you home. Is there someone that can help you?" "My wife." You were out here all alone?" He stopped talking. After a short time, he stopped walking and fell to his knees. He began to weep, and I tried to stand him up again. He latched onto me and whispered closely, I had to eat." That explained the dried blood on his mouth. When you're in a life or death situation, you have to make hard decisions. I stopped talking after that. It took us a while of trudging to make it to his home. As we approached the front door, it swung open and out ran a woman whom I assumed was his wife. "Oh my God. Honey, is that you?" She shouted as she ran up and grabbed him, all but ignoring me. She hurried him inside, saying she'd call for a doctor, leaving me in the cold. That's fine. It's probably a lot to take in. To have your husband disappear for weeks and show up out of the blue like that. I had to get home to my wife anyway. She's probably wondering where I was. On my way home, I was going over everything that had happened. What if I hadn't found him? Will he tell his wife what happened? Where was the other person that was with him? Next thing I remember, I was doubling over in pain. It came from the bottom of my stomach. Oh no, I thought. I could have just infected myself with something he had. I blacked out and woke up at home in bed. No idea how I got there. An hour or so went by. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling a pit in my stomach. The pain was immense. It was almost like a severe hunger. I thought for sure I had contracted something from the man I helped earlier. Some airborne illness. When the doctor came, he approached my bedside with caution. He had almost no professional candor. His eyes widened as he looked at me, with a certain fear. He only did a few tests and left me to be quarantined in my room alone. I could hear him speaking to my wife in the kitchen. When he goes. I couldn't make out much of the conversation. Seemed like bad news. After the doctor left, my pain only got worse. It was more distinctive hunger, however. I was becoming delirious. I couldn't remember the last time I ate. I have eaten before. Haven't I? My wife came to me asking what I needed. My only answer was meat. It's been a week now since I got sick. I've lost so much weight. I'm a ghost of my former self. But I eat constantly. Venison and beef, most commonly. My hunger is so strong I'll eat them raw. When I was at my weakest, my wife fed me, and I almost bit her fingers off a few times. Not that I mean to. I'm just starving. She's opted to start sliding food under my door. She says I'm not the same anymore. I know that much. The dog went missing, and only I know why. The doctor has come a few times again, saying the same things to my wife. However, I don't think he's saying, when he goes, it's something more like Wendigo. A Wendigo is a demon. They'll take over your body and slowly kill you. They say Wendigos do awful things to you, killing people and consuming their flesh. Soon I'll die. I can feel it. Whatever has happened to me will be the end of this body. Then I'll have to go. But what can I say? At least you got this far. I helped you out of there. You never would have survived without me. I just needed this body. It's been such a long time. Out there in the woods. I love the woods. I love the mountains. There is a horrifying thing one learns about forests when they begin to shift. They make noise. I wish I could say that it was simply a rustling or creaking as they reroute to their new location. That would almost be peaceful. They make noises that get burned into your brain. They screech, they roar, they groan in pain. Their loud whispers whimper through the air every night, reminding us that they are on the move. Their mournful lullaby does everything but help me sleep. They distill a fear in me that I haven't truly felt for 14 years. I knew this was connected to Emily's disappearance all that time ago. I'm not the only one that hears the noises, although I'm the only one who truly listens to their meaning. Many of my neighbors have put their houses up for sale already because they cannot stand the nightly symphony of nature. That's what they call it. Nature. Nothing about this is natural. I knew the trees were specifically targeting me after just a week. Nobody else had trees at their window, except me. Once at my home, at the edge of what I call my own, they stopped getting closer. They moved every night, continuing their echoes, but they did not break through my walls to reach me. The gentle tapping of branches upon my window had an eerie rhythm to them, as if someone were knocking, asking to be let in. I could almost feel their roots below the ground, beating like veins in flesh. It only took 2 nights of that before I decided to chop the branches. I knew they'd just grow back or move to a new position, but I needed to try it. That's when I discovered why the expansion of our town was canceled. Blood dripped from the branches as I cut them. This was not sap. This was red, oozing blood. It smelt metallic, and groans could be heard from deep within the forest with every chop of my tools. I had become the conductor of this symphony. For every chop, a loud, horrific screech echoed throughout the woods. It only took 5 before I couldn't continue. You may have noticed that I haven't referred to it as Inwoods for a while. That's because, as far as I'm concerned, this is no longer Inwoods. There is not a single tree that has remained in its spot. They have all chosen to disconnect themselves from Inwoods by moving inwards, towards our town and my life. I considered selling with my neighbors, but despite all the new questions I had, this was the closest I had ever come to answering Emily's disappearance. Last week, I had a dream. I hadn't dreamed in a while, or even slept much for that matter. I dreamed of Emily, now an adult, playing among the trees. We had gone into the woods together to remind ourselves of our childhood. Isn't this fun? Emily spoke with an unclear voice in this dream, almost groans. But I could still understand her. "This is," I said, vaguely aware of the real world, acutely knowing that I was sleeping. "I just wish you could really be here. Perhaps I never left. Perhaps I've been trying to find my way back to you." We stared at each other before she spoke again. "Perhaps you can join me." I jolted awake to the sound of the tapping at my window and the distant choir of the forest. Yet something about this tapping felt different, almost more excited than usual. It scraped along my window after each one, as if to no longer ask to come in, but instead to invite me outside. I peeked through the window. Many of the trees had moved away from my home. Only one was right outside. I was still tired and my vision felt crooked, but I could clearly make out the letters engraved into the bark. W.E. For a second, I felt calm. I felt the fear of the past 14 years drift away. "Emily," I spoke aloud. The forest responded with whispers that felt more gentle this time. I made my way downstairs and out the back of the house. I walked right up to the big tree and placed my hand over our initials. For just a moment there was peace. The groans stopped, as did the tapping of the window. I felt a pressure tightening in my hand, at the surface of my palm and fingertips. A creaking sound came not from the forest, but from this very spot on the big tree. It was growing around my hand. It wanted me to join it. It wanted me to become a part of the woods, my veins tangling with the roots, my thoughts tangling with the leaves. I pulled away, bits of skin tearing from the outer layers of my hand. The pain I felt was shared. The creaking returned from the forest, louder than I had ever heard it. The forest is not Emily. Emily would not put me in a position like that. She would not ask me to give up my life to become something I am not. I believe the woods have tangled with Emily's memories. That what she was fond of is now what the trees are fond of. Pieces of her mind scattered across Inwoods the day she vanished, but her soul is not there. A collective network of trees have been given the gift of thought. And it is terrifying. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/nom nom nom nation. The trees outside my window get closer every night. Trees could move in a forest every night, and you probably wouldn't even notice. There are thousands of the things in even a small forest. You couldn't possibly know the position of every one. Sure, if your go-to spot had moved, you might be suspicious. But even then, if you don't go often, you'd probably just think you misremembered. Forests have few exact landmarks. It's the same all around. You'd be forgiven for not noticing the change, for not noticing that the trees are alive. But when they're at the edge of your window, bridging between the vast empty black of the night and the safety of your own home, you'll notice. When the outside world can tap upon your glass, you notice those things. A child cries, I think I heard a noise at the window. The mother consoles, it's just a branch in the breeze, honey. Go back to sleep. You read that and feel relief from the explanation. I read that and feel fear. What could be worse than a tree at the window? A tree that was not there yesterday. I've lived on the edge of Inwoods for over a decade. It acts as the border to the west of our small town. There's my street, with Inwoods just beyond the back fencing. The woods continue for miles until the next town. They attempted to chop down the trees a few years back to expand our quaint neighborhood. The project was canceled after just a few days in favor of expanding east instead. What made them change their minds? What did they find that made them want to head in the exact opposite direction? They are afraid of something in those trees, deep within the roots, manifesting in the bark, perhaps even the leaves themselves, as they gracefully sway unsuspectingly. They have every right to be terrified. We all do. But I wasn't always scared of Inwoods. Quite the opposite, actually. I had a friend. Her name was Emily. We used to play in the woods often as children, climbing the trees, building dens. Nobody knew that place like us. If trees had moved back then, we'd have known about it. I wish I could still hold those memories fondly, but knowing what I know of the woods now, I cannot in good conscience look back and smile. One memory does stick out to me in particular, though. A special destination that I always held near and dear to my heart. A few minutes walk through the woods, staying on the dirt path and keeping to the clearings, there's a big tree. It stands alone proudly, as if there is something different about it. A forest by definition is a large group of trees, but this one didn't feel like part of it. It was a tree in a forest, yes, but it was not a part of the forest it resided in. This was its own thing. It was special. It quickly became our go-to spot, and one day, we marked it as our own by carving our initials into the bark. W.E. Emily went missing in those same woods just a few days later. It was our last time together. I think about it a lot. I was 12 at the time. My parents didn't let me join the local search parties. They told me I'd be scared. I convinced them to let me join just once, and my reaction to what I saw seemed to prove them right. They thought it was a sign of my trauma, but it wasn't. It was the cause. The big tree was gone. Where our initials once etched into a monument of nature itself was now nothing. Emptiness. Of course, nobody knew the woods like me and Emily. Trees don't move. Everyone told me. You're scared. It's okay, we all are, but trees don't move. It only took me 14 years to prove them wrong. The woods began their creeping a little over a month ago. I was getting ready for bed, yet as my glance fell over the window, I noticed a tree over the fence, one that was not there before. The first tree to take a midnight walk, at least the first I had noticed in over a decade. I found myself watching expectantly, but expectant of what I'm not sure. I thought maybe I could catch it moving, morphing in the moonlit nighttime air. But it just stood there, staring back at me. Make no mistake, this tree was staring. No eyes to see, but staring all the same. It felt like it wasn't a part of the forest. A tree in a forest that it does not belong to is a curious thought to some, but a feeling I'm used to. Every night, when I went to bed, I would look out the window. More and more trees from the forest seemed to inch closer to my property. Each time, they stopped feeling like a part of the woods. Their membership to that club ends the moment they begin the move. They are their own collective once they do. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't even sure what to say. People thought I was crazy for implying that trees move as a child. Imagine what they'd think if I said it now. But a fact not spoken is a fact all the same. There is a horrifying thing one learns about forests when they begin to shift. They make noise. I wish I could say that it was simply a rustling or creaking as they reroute to their new location. That would almost be peaceful. They make noises that get burned into your brain. They screech, they roar, they groan in pain. Their loud whispers whimper through the air every night, reminding us that they are on the move. Their mournful lullaby does everything but help me sleep. They distill a fear in me that I haven't truly felt for 14 years. I knew this was connected to Emily's disappearance all that time ago. I'm not the only one that hears the noises, although I'm the only one who truly listens to their meaning. Many of my neighbors have put their houses up for sale already because they cannot stand the nightly symphony of nature. That's what they call it. Nature. Nothing about this is natural. I knew the trees were specifically targeting me after just a week. Nobody else had trees at their window, except me. Once at my home, at the edge of what I call my own, they stopped getting closer. They moved every night, continuing their echoes, but they did not break through my walls to reach me. The gentle tapping of branches upon my window had an eerie rhythm to them, as if someone were knocking, asking to be let in. I could almost feel their roots below the ground, beating like veins in flesh. It only took 2 nights of that before I decided to chop the branches. I knew they'd just grow back or move to a new position, but I needed to try it. That's when I discovered why the expansion of our town was canceled. Blood dripped from the branches as I cut them. This was not sap. This was red, oozing blood. It smelt metallic, and groans could be heard from deep within the forest with every chop of my tools. I had become the conductor of this symphony. For every chop, a loud, horrific screech echoed throughout the woods. It only took 5 before I couldn't continue. You may have noticed that I haven't referred to it as Inwoods for a while. That's because, as far as I'm concerned, this is no longer Inwoods. There is not a single tree that has remained in its spot. They have all chosen to disconnect themselves from Inwoods by moving inwards, towards our town and my life. I considered selling with my neighbors, but despite all the new questions I had, this was the closest I had ever come to answering Emily's disappearance. Last week, I had a dream. I hadn't dreamed in a while, or even slept much for that matter. I dreamed of Emily, now an adult, playing among the trees. We had gone into the woods together to remind ourselves of our childhood. Isn't this fun? Emily spoke with an unclear voice in this dream, almost groans, but I could still understand her. "This is," I said, vaguely aware of the real world, acutely knowing that I was sleeping. "I just wish you could really be here. Perhaps I never left. Perhaps I've been trying to find my way back to you." We stared at each other before she spoke again. "Perhaps you can join me." I jolted awake to the sound of the tapping at my window and the distant choir of the forest. Yet something about this tapping felt different, almost more excited than usual. It scraped along my window after each one, as if to no longer ask to come in, but instead to invite me outside. I peeked through the window. Many of the trees had moved away from my home. Only one was right outside. I was still tired and my vision felt crooked, but I could clearly make out the letters engraved into the bark. W.E. For a second, I felt calm. I felt the fear of the past 14 years drift away. "Emily," I spoke aloud. The forest responded with whispers that felt more gentle this time. I made my way downstairs and out the back of the house. I walked right up to the big tree and placed my hand over our initials. For just a moment there was peace. The groans stopped, as did the tapping of the window. I felt a pressure tightening in my hand, at the surface of my palm and fingertips. A creaking sound came not from the forest, but from this very spot on the big tree. It was growing around my hand. It wanted me to join it. It wanted me to become a part of the woods, my veins tangling with the roots, my thoughts tangling with the leaves. I pulled away, bits of skin tearing from the outer layers of my hand. The pain I felt was shared. The creaking returned from the forest, louder than I had ever heard it. The forest is not Emily. Emily would not put me in a position like that. She would not ask me to give up my life to become something I am not. I believe the woods have tangled with Emily's memories. That what she was fond of is now what the trees are fond of. Pieces of her mind scattered across Inwoods the day she vanished, but her soul is not there. A collective network of trees have been given the gift of thought. And it is terrifying. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/Spopey_hollow. Unidentifiable 10-foot-tall creature spotted in Lebanon, Maine. My sister and I were driving to a haunted walk in Lebanon, Maine called Destination Haunt, and while in the town trying to find the place, we drove onto this really old dirt road called Lord Road from the east. At the time we turned onto the road, it was day and the sun was out. As soon as we started driving down, the sky turned near black like night, as if the sun was setting, and a fog engulfed the road. We quickly started joking about how this is like one of those wrong turn roads in those horror movies where a group of kids get lost in the woods and never leave. It added to the effect when we drove over an old wooden bridge suspended over a river. My sister acknowledged the narrowness of the road and asked how two cars could fit traveling in opposite directions. I joked, well, no one ever leaves this place. In Maine, all you see are fields of trees for hundreds of miles at a time, but the trees on this road looked unusually different. They were all collectively old and had the color sucked out of them. Their branches and bases curved in usually zigzag patterns, unlike conventional trees that grow in a pattern to get the most sunlight. I drove a few miles until I had enough of the massive puddles and decided to call the place we were trying to find. They told me that their location was miles away on the west side of this road and to turn back because the east side was flooded, and we should enter the west end entrance located on the other side of town instead. We turned around and saw a moose walking across the road, very normal in Maine, but right behind it was a 10-foot-tall black as can be two-legged and unnaturally slim creature running unnaturally fast across the road. My sister screamed. It looked like Slender Man. Only it had huge black jagged horns and had no apparent bodily features or shape to it. It looked like a 2D cutout of an unnatural human. When we drove by where he ran, we looked into the woods and saw it standing on two legs next to the moose. It leaned over in a hunchback manner and started walking around on all limbs, and there were others just like it emerging from the mist. We drove the hell out of there, hoping my engine wouldn't seize from the huge-ass puddles. But on our way back, we saw two abandoned buildings with old cars from the 50s and 60s that rotted into the earth. Those houses were not there before when we originally drove down. The creepiest part was when we got back to the main road because the sun was almost set and the sky almost pitch black. When we pulled out of the road, the sun reappeared. The sky readjusted to day as if nothing ever happened. Later that night, I looked at Google Maps and the road was completely different on there, filled with things that wasn't there when we driving, and all the houses looked new. After telling a few people about it, someone told me that Lebanon, Maine is known to have a lot of strange paranormal stuff happen, and that there is even a self-proclaimed witch fortune teller who lives there. Has anyone here experienced something like this? Sixth story. This story was shared by you/Jam102. I went to Rapid City to hunt, not knowing I was the prey. I know monsters exist. Trust me, as crazy as that sounds, it's 100% accurate. I had a hard time convincing myself at first. You try and substantiate the things you have seen. It's just an undiscovered species. That was my go-to explanation when I killed the first one. Me and a couple of my buddies had planned a hunting trip down to Rapid City, South Dakota, best place to go for your round game. Since around the age of 8, I've been making this place my very own sandbox. I knew everything about it, the lakes, trails, and those beautiful mountains. When we arrived, we set up camp, readied our equipment, and set out to plan a few traps for breakfast the next day. It was here I knew something wasn't right. As my friend was tying down a twig into one of the snags, we all heard a sharp screech rip through the idyllic woods. It caused my friend to slip, and the snag ended up closing on his finger. Whilst we were bandaging it up at the camp, the same screech ripped through again. Shrugging it off as an aggressive "I'll call," we headed off to sleep, all feeling uneasy about the crappy start to our trip. I had one of the worst night's sleep of my life, if you could call it that. I tossed and turned, kicking around in my tiny tent, until I heard a crack outside that made me freeze. The fire was burning out and it was casting the long shadows of the trees onto the side of my tent. I listened as intensely as I could and watched in mounting fear as the shadows started to change. Another dark shape was weaving in and out of the uniform line of trees, popping up behind one and each time reappearing bigger, which meant it was getting closer. Now, as an experienced hunter, I knew there was only one plausible explanation for this: a bear. These fuckers don't give a crap if you've got a fire going. If they smell food, they're coming to have a look. I reached around my tent for my backpack and searched through it as quietly as I could, the shadow now blocking out all the other trees. It was right outside. Quietly, I pulled out my hunting blade and tried to think of a plan. It would have been useless to try and take the bear full on. This isn't the Revenant. A bear will rip you in half without even blinking. I'd have to try and run for the car. The rifles were in the back. There was a noise from my other side, and I realized one of my friends must have opened their tent. I saw the shadow flicker in my peripheral vision, and when I turned to look, it was gone. Then I heard the scream. I was out of my tent within a few seconds, haphazardly looking around and holding out the knife. In front of me was an image that will be burned into my mind until the day I die. My friend, the one with the bandaged finger, being held in the hands of an abhorrent creation of God. It was at least 9 feet tall, standing on 2 legs, hairless, with a curved spine and long saggy ears. Its face was sunken and littered with cuts and scars. The wounds were festering and rotting. Its mouth was blistered and blood poured out of its gums, which were on full show, further enhancing its yellow jagged teeth. The monster was holding my friend between both its hands, claw-like and piercing into his abdomen. I screamed at it, and it snapped its head around to look me dead on. The eyes were black and lifeless. Without blinking, that fucker ripped my friend in two. As the blood and flesh scattered around the place, I saw my other friend's tent start to open. The creature must have seen me looking, because it turned and within a second was ripping at the tent opening. I took a chance. As it was reaching into the opening to rip my other friend to shreds, I pelted over and stabbed it in the back. It reared back and screeched as we had heard before, reaching over its shoulder to pull the blade out. I pushed it backwards, and it fell onto the embers of our fire and began to roll around, screeching more and more as the hot ashes burnt at its skin. My friend had stumbled out next to me, and after seeing the top half of our buddy, slumped at the base of a tree. We beat this thing into a bloody pulp. We didn't stop until the sound of bone breaking turned into muscle mushing. Our hands, chest, and faces were dark red with its blood. "Fucking weird coyote," my friend mumbled after a while. That was the first one. We reported the incident with the police. They assumed we must have been mistaken with our explanation. They actually assured us it was probably a bear or cougar, and our imagination had filled in the gaps. My friend was quick to eat that up. To this day, he's never talked about it with me. But to be honest, I haven't spent much time with him. I've been obsessed with finding out what in the fuck that thing was. I'm happy to say I made a decent amount of progress. I returned to Rapid City about a month later. I'd been online and posted about my experience on some forums. I dunno. I thought there must be someone out there who knew something. I was right. Another outdoor enthusiast called Kevin responded and told me how he'd come across something similar quite a few times. We arranged to meet up. Kevin told me how he'd grown up around the place, gone hunting with his father since he was a kid. He said the locals knew there was something dangerous up in the mountains, but they'd never been bothered by it until a few years ago. He called this creature the Wendigo. Let me just say though, it don't matter what folk tale or name you give something. If it's a monster, it probably existed long before humankind and has no concept of stories. That's another thing I think as humans do to try and substantiate things we can't explain. We give it a legend. Kevin told me how certain parts of the mountains were off limits due to unexplained disappearances. He offered to take me to a place he knew the Wendigo liked to congregate. On the way, he filled me in on some of the details. Wendigo were fast, extremely strong, had fantastic hearing, and hated fire. He tapped his backpack at this and winked. If we see any of those little shits, they'll be going up in flames. That night we reached the base of Black Elk Peak, and Kevin took me around through a hidden path to an opening carved right into the floor. It was about 50 feet wide and pitch black. I have no idea how far it went down. That's where they've been coming from. We found this about 6 months ago. Wasn't here before that. There's numerous other ones around the way, but we've had a lot of activity here, Kevin said, peeking down into the hole. We secluded ourselves between some trees and faced the hole, crouched in the dirt. Now if we see anything, you need to stay quiet. Take your photo, and we can leave okay, Kevin whispered. I told him I needed a photo of the Wendigo so I could prove to the police they existed. Sure, Kevin, I whispered back, while squeezing hard onto the Glock hidden underneath my arm. We waited and waited. The sun had gone down and the cold had really picked up. Kevin was talking about giving up when we both heard the sound of earth being moved. Squinting, I saw the top of a head protrude out of the hole, warily raising itself up. Kevin had not let me down. There, pulling itself out of the hole with those huge claws and drooping skin, was the Wendigo. This one was smaller than the one I killed, but it made up for it by being twice as ugly. It cracked its neck upwards and started to sniff at the air. Its tongue flipped in and out of its mouth like a snake. Then it arched back and let out that terrible screech. I felt the ground shake slightly and Kevin grabbed hold of my arm. I hadn't even realized, but I pulled out the gun. Don't you fucking dare. Kevin screamed at me. Better get those Molotovs ready, I said, and turned to look at the opening. In the short time it had taken for Kevin to admonish me, there were now 5 Wendigos standing on the edge of the hole, staring directly at me and Kevin. They were all different heights and all had trouble standing straight, leaning into their claws, with a focused and hungry leer painted across each rotting face. I shot first. By the time the first Wendigo's brains had hit the ground, the other 4 were already galloping at us, tearing up the ground and emitting those deafening screeches. I turned to help Kevin, but he was already lighting the rag of a petrol bottle. He threw it and it shattered into flames in front of the beasts. They scattered around the flames, still gunning for us. I shot another in the shoulder and it crashed into the ground, writhing around. Another stopped to help it, so I took a shot but missed. It flinched as the bullet whizzed past and turned slowly to face me, its lips curled and teeth bared. I took another shot, but its fallen comrade lunged upwards and caught the bullet in the back. It fell into the flailing arms of the one who had tried to help it, and they both crumpled to the ground. The other 2 had reached Kevin, who smashed another Molotov at his feet. A surge of flames erupted in front of him like a wall and engulfed one of the Wendigos entirely. The other jumped away like a kangaroo, but went crashing into a rock, stumbling and finally falling to the floor, breathing rapidly. I shot at the one on fire to stop it running around screaming. It hit the ground, charred and whimpering. Within 10 seconds, this lovely little slice of nature had turned into what looked like a war zone. Kevin was on the floor panting, and I was leaning against a tree, trying to catch my breath. We both caught each other's eye and started to nervously laugh. That's when I learned one of my most important lessons. Never take your eye off the ball. It felt like a hot whip had been slapped across my face. The Wendigo who'd stopped to assist the one I clipped had snuck up and slashed me right across the face. I felt the chunks of skin rip off my cheekbones, and I fell onto the ground unable to see, and with only a faint buzzing to hear. I blacked out. Of course I survived. It's kind of a spoiler considering you're reading about it all, but yeah, it didn't get to kill me that day. Thankfully, Kevin was able to scare it off before it sunk its teeth into me. He told me afterwards he only had 1 Molotov left, so I should feel grateful he wasted it on me. We become pretty good friends. One good thing to come from all this in any case. Of course, I told the police what happened, but they're not interested. It's bad for business, I suppose. Nobody wants to go hunting where they could be the prey. Just be careful if you go down to Rapid City. There's something there that's not afraid to tango. And remember, fire is your friend. 7th story. This story was shared by you/mythical puppers. The mountains of Colorado. I don't even know how it happened. It just kind of did. All you should really know is that out of 5 of my friends, I'm the only one that made it out alive. Me and my friends decided to go to our log cabin mansion in the cold and icy mountains of Colorado. Now, don't think that the cabin was ours, because it was actually my friend Michael's parents' cabin, not ours. Call us childish, but we decided to go in the middle of winter for even more snow. My car didn't fit more than 4 people, so Alexis had to drive herself and 2 more of my friends to the cabin instead of just coming with us in the car that she drove over to my house in. Although I didn't like it, there was nothing I could. I couldn't just make my car magically fit 6 people. We got to the mountains in about 2.5 hours after I began driving. Now, despite what people may think, the mountains do have some places to stay warm inside so that you don't freeze to death. I never thought I'd have to use one of them, but after about an hour of waiting for Alexis to respond to my text asking her what's taking her so long, me and my friends went inside of the bus stop looking thing and were immediately brought with warmth. Alexis finally showed up about 20 minutes after we went in, and I asked her what happened and why she didn't respond to my text. Sorry, Belle. I forgot my phone at your house and had to turn back to get it. Okay, so how come when you got your phone, you didn't see my text? Well, when I got my phone, I was in such a hurry to get back that I didn't even take a second to check it. I just took it and ran back to my car. I felt like crap for scolding her on something that made sense. But, could you blame me? Let's just get to the cabin, guys, Blake said. Yeah, Levi said. Yeah, I guess we should. I agreed with them. On our hike up to the cabin, Jessica realized she left her purse back in the bus stop looking place, and Blake said that he'd help her go back to get her bag. We all made kissy faces, and I even think that Levi said, "You can get her, buddy." We all knew that Blake liked Jessica, although he tried to say that he didn't love her, and while we were doing what we did, Blake said was just kind of saying, yeah. While he walked Jessica to the area where we were all sure they would kiss. We kept hiking and saw some weird signs saying stuff like, "The Lord shall bless this cursed place," and they're waiting, and "Lord, please save our souls." Now, I get that some people who are religious try to spread the word of God or whatever, but I felt like this was a bit much, right? We all just kind of groan in annoyance as more signs like the first 2 keep popping up. Who the hell took the time to put all these signs up? Levi said. To be honest, I was wondering the same thing. Like, who would take the time out of their day to put some dumb signs up that spread the word of God? Looking back on the trip, we should have just turned around and walked back to the car. We're nearly to the cabin when I see a figure behind us. Jessica and Blake. Hey guys. I call out to them. Had fun? Levi asks them while kissing the air. Like before, both Jessica and Blake ignore Levi and just groan a half-hearted hello when they got closer to him. Blake seemed fine, but something about Jessica seemed worried. Can we go to the cabin now? Jessica says. Like right now. Sure. Levi and I say at the same time. I felt like I should have asked her what was wrong, but deep down I knew that even if I did ask her, she wouldn't have told me anything that happened. We finally reached the door of the cabin, took a deep breath, and entered in. It was beautiful inside. How Michael's parents afforded this, I have no idea. Holy shit, guys. Alexis says. Holy shit indeed, Michael says. The inside of the cabin had one of those bear skin rugs, beautiful cabin-looking chandeliers, 2 stories, beautiful couches and pillows, and even a 24-inch flat-screen TV. Words can't describe how I felt when I entered the cabin. Jessica and Blake say that they're going to go explore the cabin while Alexis takes a shower. Michael goes off and does whatever Michael does, and Levi says that he's going to go check out which room he wants to sleep in. Now it's just me and Peyton. Peyton was always an odd girl, so she said that she'd explore the basement. The fucking basement of all things. I just kind of tell her to have fun in the basement. Now it's just me. I don't really know what to do, so I decide to watch TV. I was halfway through the newest episode of Friends when I hear Peyton call for us from downstairs. Guys, you should check this out. She says. I go to get my other friends and we head downstairs. Peyton is already waiting for us when we head down the steps and says to just follow her. What happened? And why do you want us? Is what we kept asking, but whenever we did, she'd just raise her hand and say to follow. When we finally reached an open window, she said, "This is what you needed to see." You wanted us to see a window that's open? Levi said, "How do you know open windows were my favorite?" Blake says, "Michael's parents most likely forgot to close the window when they last left," I tell her. No, she says. When I was checking out the basement dash, she's cut off by Levi. You wanted to check out the basement of all places. Haha, he says. She groans and continues. When I was checking out the basement, I came here first cause I thought I saw something move in the corner of my eye. When I came here, the window was open and I shut it close. I began to walk again and 8 minutes later, I hear something open. The window. I ran over here hoping that it wasn't the window opening, but it was. She finishes. Maybe you didn't shut it hard enough, Alexis says. I know I shut it close. Peyton yells. Fine. We believe you, I tell her. I'm scared that someone has broken into the cabin and my eyes weren't playing tricks on me when I saw that thing in the corner of my eye. Maybe, just maybe, if we had taken that seriously, we could have prevented what was to happen next. We all head upstairs and resume our tasks. Alexis says that she wants to get some fresh air before heading to bed and goes outside. We all just kind of go MHM and continue doing what we were doing. After about half an hour, I begin to worry if Alexis is okay. I tell Peyton and Levi, and they also say that they've begun to worry, too. We decide that we'll go out and see if she's okay. We leave the cabin and begin to call out for her. When she doesn't answer after around the 8th time, we begin to really worry. Belle, I'm hurt. Please help me. I hear my mom's voice in the forest. I nearly ran when I realized that the pitch of her voice was different. It wasn't like an "I'm in pain" pitch, but more different than that. I fell onto rocks and now I'm really hurt. Belle, please. I continue to hear. Do you guys hear my sister asking for help? Levi asks. No, but do you hear my mom? I ask them. No. They both respond. I began to get anxious. It doesn't exactly sound like my sister, though. It sounds different, lower pitched. Levi says, I hear my mom asking for help. I have to go. I tell them, because my mom sounds like she's on the verge of death. Is your mom's voice pitched differently? Levi and Peyton ask. Yeah, I respond. I've heard rumors that Wendigos stay in snowy and mountainy areas like Colorado, Peyton says. Wendigos don't exist, Peyton. Levi says. Yeah, that's probably just some stupid story some parent made up to scare their children into not doing anything dangerous like hiking, I tell her. You guys know I believe in stuff like Wendigos. She says. I am leaving, she tells us. What do you mean you're leaving? We still need to find Alexis. I tell her. If Wendigos do haunt this area, Alexis is fucking dead, guys. She yells at me. You're just thinking of saving your ass. Levi says. So what if I want to live my life and not die? That's my choice. She yells right back. She begins to storm off. Me and Levi agree that she's trying to save her own skin and doesn't care whether or not Alexis died. I notice something that looks like it is feasting on a dead carcass. I look a little bit closer in disgust and realize that it's not a carcass. It's a corpse. And more than that, it was the corpse of Alexis. Tears silently streaming down my face like when raindrops slide down your window. I tell Levi that we have to run back to the cabin. He asks why, and when I tell him, we try to be as quiet as we can be while running to the cabin. Levi accidentally trips on a twig, and the sound of the twig snapping notifies the creature, and when it looks at us I can see its sickly white antlers and weird skull it seems to be wearing. The skull looks like one of those cow skulls they always use in Wild West-themed movies. It lets out a blood-curdling scream and begins to run at us with unnatural speed. That's when I realize what it is. Peyton was right. Wendigos exist, and I was about to be a dead person so this Wendigo could feast on me. I helped Levi up, and we continued to run. Levi slowed down now due to him hurting his leg when he tripped. I saw the life leave his eyes as he realized he had no hope of surviving. Not a string of hope to even look for to hold on to. Nothing. He began to cry, tears streaming down his face, and just fell to his knees. I always heard stories of how it feels to see someone lose all hope. I would have never felt it would be like this. He looked at me and just gave up. He had nothing to hold on to, nothing to look for, nothing to think about except his death. I saw the Wendigo jump onto Levi and kill him. In Levi's last moments alive, I saw his eyes go from an amazing green to a lifeless white. I wished I would have been able to help Levi, but I couldn't. I make it back to the cabin, and when I entered in, I felt little to no hope when I remembered that there was someone else in the cabin with us. Then it hit me. When I entered into the cabin, everyone was downstairs except for Peyton. With my nose stuffy, I asked them where Peyton is. They say that they thought she was with me and that she hasn't been back since she left with us. I try to wipe my tears away because I didn't want to tell them that Levi had died a horrible and brutal death. What happened to you? And where's Levi? Michael asks. He's dead, I say between trembling breaths. He's what? They all ask. Dead. I say again. What? How? Blake asks. I don't think I mentioned this, but Blake was Levi's brother, so to lose Levi must have hurt the most for Blake than it did for any of us. We were walking back and he tripped and hit his head on a boulder. I lied to them. I didn't want to tell them what actually happened as they probably wouldn't believe me and it would be too gruesome to hear. Blake tells us that he needs a minute alone and goes to his room. Jessica follows him to comfort him, and Michael says he needs to think. I begin to hear knocks coming from the basement. It's my brother's voice now. It's SSS so cold down here, BB Bell. The creature lies. It wasn't a human that entered the cabin. Actually, it was far from it. It was a Wendigo, and it's hungry. PP, please open the door. It continues to lie. I hear glass breaking from the second floor. I run upstairs and nearly open Blake's door when I hear a freakishly high-pitched scream. Jessica. That was Jessica's scream. I open the door, and the first thing I notice is the broken glass on the floor. Then I turn and see Blake being eaten. That damn Wendigo in the basement was a distraction. I run and try to tell Michael that there's something in the cabin, and we book it. I hear Jessica scream again, but this time, her scream fades out. She's dead. Now it's just me and Michael. I told him to run as fast as he could, and that he should just leave his crap and head to the car. Even though it was in the snow, we ran for our fucking lives. I saw a Wendigo look at me in the forest, and if it's even possible, I could have sworn I saw it wink at me. I looked back, and the Wendigo was gone. Me and Michael finally made it to our car and went in. I tried to start the car, but it wasn't budging. That's when I saw it. The same Wendigo look at me, blink, then it was gone. Except this time, when it disappeared, I heard a bang on the top of our car. I tried to start the car as fast as I could, and right before it started, the Wendigo broke the glass next to Michael and tried to grab him. He kept dodging, but the Wendigo figured out his pattern and threw him out the car. The Wendigo started to feast on Michael as the life in him died. As the life in him died just as it had died in Levi. Same terror, same realization, same transition from his eye color to white. The Wendigo looked at me before it stopped feasting and waved. I drove as fast as I could out of that place. All those signs about God make sense now. They were warnings to leave this horrible place. We just didn't care at those warnings and scoffed at them. I made it back to my house and locked all the doors. It's been 19 years and I still can't get those horrific images out of my head. Images of Levi's life being drained away. Images of Jessica screaming to no avail. There's something I didn't mention. When I got home, later into the night, I saw something in the roads. It waved at me then disappeared. Nothing else has happened since that night, but I am never going to go back to that cabin. The cops suspected me as the murderer of my friends, but no evidence ever came up as there was no bodies or fingerprints. Please, for dear God, don't ignore the signs in the mountains of Colorado. Me and my friends did, and I guess it's a lesson to others to not do the same. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.